amazing to be live and in person and back in Jackson and back at Hope. So round of applause for everybody making it here. Bill, such a delight to be back with you. This was a board I was delighted to serve on, and you allowed me to resign to serve in the prior Obama administration, but you're always a Hope member, so it's great. Dane, I've had the joy of meeting you today. I'm going to move this plant just a little bit. This has been an incredible time of pain in our country, but also a time of promise. And it's because institutions like Hope were ready to stand up. And we have had incredible things happen. We'll be saying a little more later about big federal investments in Hope. But America's corporations discovered the work that was going on here. And one of them was Nike. And Dane, we're so thrilled to have you in Mississippi, I think the first time.
First time.
Nike's in my hometown of Beaverton, Oregon. But this was a major shift for all of you who have seen the odyssey of Hope growing from the early stages to have a major corporation make a $10 million deposit in Hope Credit Union was an amazing game change. So we're here, yes. So tonight's conversation, and someone who's going to have to give me the hook at the right place because there's so many juicy things to dig into. But tonight's conversation, we want to dig into a little bit to show why this happened and really what the promise is possible now, because the journey of Hope has been joined by others. So Dane, I'm going to start with you.
Sure.
I am going to start about the why and the how of this investment. And I'd like to talk a little bit about how you found Hope and why.
Yeah, sure.
Why was it that you embarked on this journey?
Sure, and before I start, just a huge thank you to the city of Jackson, Mississippi, to the Hope family, and to everyone here. My first time in Mississippi, and I'm blown away. As a New Yorker, I'm definitely blown away. Not as many skyscrapers, but amazing people, amazing culture. For us, from a Nike's been doing a lot of work in this space. And the next step was to figure out, again, just the short answer is why not?
I love it, yeah.
Right? Just a personal story and a snippet. When I landed here, I noticed so much swooshes and so much Nike apparel from people in the airport to get into the hotel, and you look at people's feet. And, one thing we thought about was, from a treasury perspective and as finance professionals, Nike's been doing some work for a very long time from a brand perspective, but how do we look at the balance sheet? And how do we exercise our balance sheet to be consistent with what we're doing in our brand? And how do we construct long-term sustainable relationships to make sure that they're meaningful, to make sure that we can trace impact, and that was the thought process. So we did a lot of work in building an underwriting mechanism to find partners like Hope. The way that we met was through a talk that Bill did, and I met him through Shannon Alwyn at Netflix, and hello to Shannon if she's watching. And immediately, we were just blown away, and in hearing what Hope is doing for the Deep South, and the conviction in the product, the conviction in how capital was allocated to underserved communities, it made perfect sense, right? So we thought about it as an ecosystem, and it was a snowball effect. Our athletes come from these communities, right? That's how you make it go full circle. You tie it into your product, and passing places like Jackson State and seeing all the academic institutions here, then you don't even have to tour for it. You could just drive from the airport and you see how much of it ties into the product. It just makes perfect sense. Why not contribute to those households and make sure that we can make sure our product goes full circle?
It's powerful.
So I thought about it as a full circle ecosystem.
And remember, Dane is sitting in the treasury of Nike. He's not on the comms and brand team. He's sitting in the treasury of Nike. And Is this a typical transaction for Nike to make a $10 million deposit in a CDFI, Mississippi-based?
It's typical of Nike's brand to just do it by any means possible.
Yes.
Right. And so the goal was to actually provide a roadway for not just us, but for like companies to do the same. So I think the work and the mindset is typical. For us, it was a new endeavor as a treasury organization, but we wanted to take advantage of the fact that as a growing company, we were going to leverage that additional cash position to actually make meaningful change and make meaningful impact into the communities that matter the most to us.
Got it.
So yeah.
You're growing. So there is cash to invest.
We're still growing. It's
And
an
you're
older
still
company,
growing.
but we're still growing.
That's so
Bring it
powerful.
on.
Good.
Absolutely.
Good. We're going to help you. All right, Bill, I'm going to come to you. Talk a little bit about the impact of the Nike investment and what it means for the communities that Hope serves.
But before I do that, I don't want to let Dane off the hook. Yes, it is part of who Nike is. They have done a great deal to focus attention on the solutions that are facing communities in this country, even though they are a shoe and apparel business. Their social marketing is better than any. But it takes leadership.
Yeah.
It takes someone who understands and connects the dots. And the first conversation that I had with Dane, it was clear that he understood how important this is to putting people in a position where they can support their families, where they can contribute to the economy, and that is good for business. And he saw the alignment between what we do at Hope and what Nike's priorities are. So but it does take someone who's got the vision and the commitment, and who happens to be in the head of global treasury at one of the world's largest corporations.
Helps,
So
helps to be well positioned, but yeah.
No, but it is a game changer for the communities that we serve to have companies understand the alignment between our mission, which is to help people regardless of where they live, what their race is, what their gender is, have the tools they need to support their families. And if you think of those tools, education, healthcare, quality housing, decent food, access to a basic banking account, none of that happens unless you have financial resources. Those are disproportionately absent in the communities that we serve. When you think about the Deep South, it's a place where you've got communities that for over half a century have had over 20% poverty, deep-rooted, entrenched poverty. You go to a place like Itta Bynum, which the vice president made reference to just a couple of days ago. And if we had every deposit, we are the only financial institution in Itta Bynum, Mississippi. And if we had every deposit, we'd have about $1.2, $1.3 million.
It wouldn't add up to the 10. That's
hardly enough to provide people with the ability to buy a home, to get away from a payday debt trap, to start and grow a small business. And so, you import the kind of resources that Nike, that Netflix, that PayPal have made available to Hope. Over the past year, we've been able to secure $100 million in transformational deposits. But it would not have happened without the leadership of folks like Dane and like Shannon and Aaron at Netflix and Dan Schulman at PayPal. They understand that their well-being is aligned with Hope's. I think it was McKinsey that did an analysis that shared that if you level the playing field, if you level the playing field between black wealth and white wealth, you will add $1.5 trillion to the economy by 2028. If you could do that, $1.5 trillion, that's a game changer.
That's real money.
And regardless of which side of the aisle you sit on, what your priorities are, that helps us all.
Yeah. Bill, this is, you use the word game changer. Yeah. And I'll go a little wonky for a minute. Having corporations stand up without any push from government and make investments is a game changer, right?
Yes.
This we couldn't have imagined before. So, Dane, you're part of a sea change that happened in a tragic time when we were in a recession and, in a massive pandemic and really in a racial reckoning. Bill, this has also been a time of federal resources. They had to come to the rescue in a pandemic, and we celebrate, finally, federal resources reaching us. Hope has been the recipient of powerful federal resources. I'm going to let you give the audience the number. But what's the difference when you get corporate dollars and federal dollars? What difference does it make?
No, it is, it's great when you have an administration that gives a damn about the communities that we serve, but that's not always the case. Very different outcomes, different parts of the country, depending on who sits in the executive chairs, in those governor mansions, in the legislature. Depends on who's sitting in the White House, who controls Congress. You have very different outcomes depending on what their policy priorities are. And disproportionately, those have not benefited people in the Deep South. If you look at where slavery was concentrated prior to the Civil War, and you look at where you have the highest levels of unemployment, the least banking access, the worst health conditions, the worst housing conditions, they are very much the same. And those are disproportionately communities of color, and those are in the Deep South. And so it's great when you have public officials that prioritize that, which we have now. We've got, we can talk about the record investments in community development financial institutions, minority financial institutions. But when you have private support, which has been part of Hope's DNA since our beginning. I was hired by, in addition to people like, my board members who are here, the folks who are leaders in many fields. One of the things that drew me to Hope was when Rob Walton, chairman of Walmart, flew to Pennsylvania to advocate for investments in the Delta. He understands that Walmart can't sell stuff if people don't have income. The stronger the economy, the stronger his business. That's his future workforce. And when an increasingly diverse economy we're not looking at people of color being the minority. It's an emerging majority in this country. And so you can't afford to leave most of the country on the outside of the economy looking in. And so companies, corporations, they're not. They understand, their quarterly balance, shareholder reports. They've got to pay attention to that, but they more take the long view. And the long view says that you've got to invest in your future customers, your future workforce. You've got to have an economy that works for everyone. And so that's the difference between private and public. When public's good, it's great. You can't beat it. I wish we had $6.5 trillion instead of one and three quarter trillion coming into the economy. I think we could improve climate. We could improve the water systems in Jackson. We could do a lot. We could improve the school superintendent. We could do things that I think set this country on a new course. But until we get that, we've got to build on those who get it, and people like Dane get it.
Yeah. I love that. Build on those who get it. And just so folks know, I lead one of the nation's largest networks of community development financial institutions. And one of the things that happened out of this crisis was a bipartisan effort to move $12 billion to community development financial institutions and minority development institutions. And we had the first billion announced this summer, and we had the next $9 billion announced this week. And Hope is a proud recipient of $88 million of investments. This has been a very long road, and the board that is here, you have seen the lean years, the skinny cow years, and you have seen, and it is a joy to recognize that this field that's frankly been starved for capital and knows where to use every dollar. But I think what what Bill is speaking about, and it is in the DNA of Hope, that private-public partnerships are what built this. And it is wonderful when the public can step up. And out of crisis, there has been an acknowledgement that the hopes of the world are needed. But Bill, is this it? Do you see further scale? What do you think?
No, this we're just lighting the fuse.
Okay.
We're just lighting the fuse. 27 years. It took us 14 years to get to about over $80 million in assets. And this week we got $88 million in one day, a commitment for $88 million.
So good.
And each dollar that we're getting from Treasury, really want to thank the administration, Secretary Yellen, Vice President Harris made the announcement at the Freedmen's Bank, the bank that Frederick Douglass led. And it was quite appropriate that this investment in the most vulnerable, most neglected communities in the country came at that forum.
Yeah.
And every dollar of that $88 million can support, $8 to $10 in deposits.
Yeah.
Deposits from, well, hopefully more from my friend
There you go, Dane.
in
All
Portland.
right.
But he, as he said, he's bringing his peers along. Nike,
Yes.
Netflix have encouraged others to follow their lead. There are individuals, thousands upon thousands of individuals that could put a fully insured by the full faith and credit of the United States deposit in Hope, and those monies will go into the Itabenas, into the Selmas,
Yes.
which is still the poorest town in the state of Alabama. 50 plus years after John Lewis walked across the Selma Bridge, the Edmund Pettus Bridge, we've got to finish. We've got to finish this. We're just getting started, Lisa.
Deep breath, folks. I love that. We're sitting in the Civil Rights Museum. We have work to finish as a country, and it's proud to see this. So, Dane, you've heard Bill speak to the scale and say we're not done, and we've got a long road to finish. What do you see this? How do you think about this as a transaction versus a partnership over time? What have you seen in this year of working from the Nike perspective about a partnership with Hope?
Yeah, great question. So for me, we rewind back to your statement, leveling the playing field, right? Like that's something that's in our D&I mission and vision, right? The way we think about it, honestly, and we spoke about it quickly last night, is preference versus conviction, right? Being convicted to make change versus it being a preferential situation when it's convenient.
Yeah.
The goal for us is to construct long-term, sustainable, sticky relationships. Like tonight, I think of this as part of, we're not writing any checks tonight, but this is part of the deepening of the relationship, right? I'm just a representative of a broader team in my leadership at Nike that has said, let's do the work to make sure that this sticks, meaning that when things come up, let's make sure Hope is still the priority. Right, it's not a grant, it's not a donation, it's not an announcement, and there's nothing that really went out from Nike about this because this is like, to your point, this is the lighting of the fuse. Now our real work comes in where we have to start feeding the ecosystem, right? And part of feeding the ecosystem is building out partnerships, and not just Nike, right? Like there need to be other companies like Nike doing this work. So we're just an example, but where the breath comes in, where the substance comes in, are nights like tonight. And us having these conversations and understanding how we can do further impact. Dollars are accessible. The U.S. has a lot of liquidity right now, right? Nike has a good amount of liquidity right now, and it's put us in this position to build this partnership. But the way that we've looked at it is we scrupulously underwrited the way that we wanted to partner and thought about how we would build our DE&I initiative.
Diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Correct.
For the Nike company.
For the Nike company, specifically so that we could make these long-term sustainable relationships and that they can go a long way. So when we speak about lighting of the fuse, our team and our organization under Patty Johnson and Matt Friend and Jim Buffano is just one way to start the relationship, right? But when you think about the relationships now with Nike as a sport company, right, and what opportunities exist in our marketing and with HBCUs. Like, that's how you open up the ecosystem, right? That's how you build economies.
Right.
We're talking about economics with the investment, but we're really trying to actually build substantial economies. So the goal for us is to create stickiness.
I
Right?
love
This
it.
has to be stickiness, and you know, we're convicted as an organization. I'm convicted as a black male to make sure that we do what we can do to best service underserved communities, especially because we just have a unique organic partnership in the power of sport. So why not? You know.
Yeah. Do you think the broader Nike, the athletes, could also find interest in supporting the hopes of the world? Do you think this is a kind of investment that will translate broader?
Absolutely, I would hope
company?
so, right? I mean, hope. I use the word hope a lot, but
Yeah.
I
It's
would
okay.
hope that, you know,
You're in a good room
yeah,
to talk about hope.
Right, exactly. We think about, again, that broader
Yeah.
ecosystem. I use that word all the time
Yeah.
because, again, there's like the snowball effect when, you know, the dollar amount is what it is, that deposit is what it is.
Yeah.
We want to grow there, but, you know, and a question that I often get from our leadership is, what's next? Like, we know this is literally
Yeah.
just like a part of like the start of a partnership. That was just like a signing on an application, right? Like, how do we build substance? And how do we make sure that we can also influence others, right? So, you know, aligning it with our mission, vision, and values was key for us to
Right.
get this partnership off the ground.
Yeah.
And we're hoping that we can at least serve as an example for others to do the same, especially other Treasury organizations. Treasury, for many, for those who aren't familiar, you know, our jobs are really just we're guardians of the balance sheet, right? Strategic advisors. That's our role, is to make sure we're managing cash, engaging with the capital markets. And you know, when you think about traditional banking, it's a very difficult synergy to build when you start to talk about underserved communities, because most people view them as almost like an assigned risk, right?
Yes.
But if you really understand the product and your ecosystem, that's actually money coming back to you,
Yeah.
right?
It's
And you're investing in your people, your customers, your product. So,
If you could say something to other Treasury officials, other corporate officials, from your time here today and from this investment, what would you say to help them understand the risk of this kind of investment or the opportunity?
Yeah, well, let's take away the word risk. I think everything has risk to it, but I think at the end
life
of the
is
day,
risky.
right, right, life is risky. What I would say is, you know, it's authenticity, right? And I you know, to circle back at it, what we did with Hope and with all of our partners, this is with the larger banking partners that we have, and you know, with newer ones like Hope, is we underwrite it to not just look at like capital capabilities and assets under management, but how authentic are you to what you're talking about? Right, and we asked of the bigger banks, insurance companies, like what does diversity, equity, and inclusion mean to you? Do you even know, like, is it like a regulatory requirement, or like, are you convicted? Again, are you convicted by it, right? Or is this something that at the end of the day, that when the economy becomes turbulent, you're still going to stick with? And that's a big part for us. So, you know, for other folks out there, I think the easy give me out of this is like, just line it up with your product. Right, for us, it was the power of sport, right? We know at the end of the day, the power of sport comes out of the Deep South here in the U.S., right? If you look at the folks that are our premier athletes, and the synergy between the Deep South, it just made perfect sense. There was no reason to not do it. It was it was a gimme. So I think when you start to look at other products and other synergies that are out there, figure out the connectivity between your enterprise and your org-wide mission, vision, and values, and find a way to connect them.
Yeah.
Right now, I think Hope connects them with so many different Fortune 500 companies from so many different ways. It makes sense for a lot of organizations, but you've got to be willing to put the work in, because again, it can't be a donation. It has to be mutually beneficial, right? And that has to be the angle, and it has to be long-term. It has to be sustainable, and there's got to be impact. The blessing in this is the fact that, like today, I saw the impact. We did a tour. I saw the impact in the community. And that's very rare to be able to say, okay, I'll make this donation in April. Oh yeah, and by the way, the dollars are going to this.
Yeah.
that's incredibly
This is
rare. So I'm
really-
humbled by the ability
great.
to be here.
This is great.
Yeah.
You were literally giving us the playbook for how to engage others. And I love both the stickiness and the sticking to it,
Yeah.
that you have talked about. So we did get out in the community today. And any of you who've had the chance to see the work of Hope and to be with Bill and Ed and Pearl and the folks who can really show you, it's so impactful. I never avoid a chance to be here, and I've eaten my way through Mississippi for the decades here. But it is powerful. But Bill, let's talk a little bit about impacts. One of the things that Nike was attracted to was your thesis of actually building healthier communities with money, with a credit union, with a loan fund. Are we overpromising, or is this the real deal? Can we get to healthier communities through the intervention of a credit union and a loan fund?
Well, one of my early board members said that the people in the Delta, the people in the Deep South can do anything if they have the opportunity. They have not had the opportunity. Look at Nick Wallace. Nick is the embodiment of economic mobility. He talked about what he's what he's building, how he's bringing people along, and where he has come. The guy is just going to change communities. He's going to change lives, and he's going to be a role model for so many. We went to Provine High School today, where we have a branch, and we are equipping not only people with understanding of how the banking system can work for them, not a payday lender or a check cashier, but a actual federally insured financial institution is there for them. And it's not just something that they do transaction. They're being trained, they're being given skills, and they are a member owner. We are accountable to them. And so I think it's a matter of how you engage the community. We take seriously the fact that we are owned by our members. Majority of our members are women. The majority of our members are people of color. And if we don't do right by them, then we are out of business. And so we're proud to be able to represent them and to serve them, and also to take their issues to places where they don't have access to. They don't have Dane's number. Yeah. They can't walk into a member of Congress's. But when you can take their stories, we talked about the legislation, the $12 billion. The first draft of that Congress passed, it included language from our Hope Policy Institute that took. And so it's not just affecting people in the Deep South, it's affecting economically underserved communities across the country. And when you equip people with the tools, they can do anything that anyone else can. They just need the resources. Nick, we have the president of Tougaloo College here tonight, one of the outstanding historically black colleges in the country. But when Tougaloo needed a paycheck protection loan, they couldn't go to one of the largest banks in the state. Yeah. They came to Hope Credit Union, and we were proud to be able to be there for them. And so that's where we fit into the financial ecosystem. And I think it's important now that Congress, that America is recognizing that Hope Credit Unions, community development financial institutions, minority financial institutions, community banks that have a track record of investing in those communities are critical to closing the gaps that limit us from reaching our potential.
Thank you. I've felt like this moment in our history in crisis proved that we have something to give. Yeah. The Hope Credit Unions, the Hope Enterprise Loan Funds, they're not junior anything. This is a skilled set of professionals who are so needed in this economy, and you have proved that, so what a joy. I'm going to go to my last few questions here, so there's that amazing dinner waiting for us. Sorry for those of you who are streaming this online. You got to come back. Dane, I want to come to you and just talk a little bit about what stands out for you, both in your visit today and, what will you think of when you think about this investment that Nike was able to make in Hope?
Sure. I probably took 1,000 pictures today, and it can't make up for 1% of what I felt. There's a spirit about this city. There's a spirit about the people here that embodies the Deep South. As someone that comes from New York City, again, I'm going to reiterate that because I love to shout my city out. And living on the West Coast, you see a lot of different personalities. You see a lot of different characteristics in different cities. There's a historic legacy that's been retained here that is probably like none other that I've ever seen. I've traveled around the world. And Hope is dead smack in the middle of it. It's an enabler in a positive way. And I think about, just from my visit, landed here yesterday, the state of Mississippi and being here in Jackson, that's the rocket. Hope is part of that fuel, right? That's the substance that's really going to help things take off, but also help build opportunity. Just, we walked to one of the branches earlier today, and we had a pretty cool way of getting there around town today. And when we came off, there were clients that just knew everyone coming off of our bus today, right? This was home, and we walked into the branch, and it felt like a living room. And that's how it should feel when you're dealing with your finances, right? There was no transactional nature. It was literally, I was almost ready to sit down and just bust out a table and just ask for a good meal. It really just, and it smelled good, by the way. It smelled phenomenal in the branch. But just seeing a level of family and community, that's what it's actually about, and being able to enable. And one thing that we were talking about was, there are what we consider to be very small pieces of impact go a very long way for people and for institutions. So, not to underestimate the magnitude of, one, paying attention, two, capital contributions, three, understanding what even some companies maybe consider to be a small amount can do for cities and for states.
Right.
And that's my biggest takeaway. It was just, I'm overwhelmed, and I'm probably very short for words right now and stuttering, because honestly, for me, as someone that has a family that comes from the Deep South, I saw a restaurant that served chitlins. My grandmother made chitlins every New Year, and I never knew where they came from. So, just seeing that and being able to tie to that personally, but also understand that was part of the DNA of what has helped build our brand. Again, this is full circle. So the personal story for me is I was able to tie it full circle. As a kid from Brooklyn who at 6, 7 years old, my mom was getting me Jordans, and being here at Nike, and then being able to tie into the high school that we went to, where every other kid I saw had on Jordans or SB Dunks or whatever, fresh sneakers, and then seeing a Hope Credit Union in the middle of that high school, and kids learning about financial literacy, learning about bills, learning about financial responsibility, and spreading the word to their friends was eye-opening. And that's just with this little deposit. So what more can we do to help build into that ecosystem? So that's the conviction that I take away from it. That's the conviction that I'll continue to share with my team. And that's what we were put to work to do. That the first thing that when we presented this opportunity to leadership, the first question we had was let's make sure we do the work.
I love it.
To make sure it matches up. And
your conviction is powerful, and we just need to.
Thank you.
Clearly, Hope needs a little Nike branch here. We need you to be here. So, Bill, I'm going to end with you, and let's end on the next part of the story. Let's talk about the sequel. Let's leave our audience with a little preview to the next chapter that you see for this work. You are a visionary. We had a chance to work with several big technology companies this year, Google and Twitter. CEO of Twitter said, "My vision is that someday every corporation will hold the debt of CDFIs. It'll just be normal." And I love that vision, but
Yeah.
I'm curious about your vision. What's the next part of the story?
You know, it's really exciting to have the opportunity to dream about taking our work to the next level of impact. There are so many communities that lack access to the basic tools needed to support their families. I think we are on the verge of expanding opportunity in the Deep South, but I know that we can't do it by ourselves. I learned from my friend Fred Miller in Anguilla, the Bank of Anguilla. You cannot put people into a computer and spit them out and believe that you're going to come with the right decisions. You've got to sit down with people like the old community banks did, like this is Christmas time. What's the
Christmas Scouts? Oh, It's
Miss
a Wonderful
Bailey.
Life. It's a
Yeah.
Wonderful Life.
Yeah, it's a wonderful life. You got to treat people like they matter. You got to treat people with dignity, and that takes investment. We've got partners who understand now that you have to invest
do.
in these communities. You can't treat people like a liability to be managed. They're an asset to be developed and nurtured, and so that's what we want to do more and more in communities across this region, and just see a little hope around the region and see what happens. I think we'll be amazed and with what people can do when they have the opportunity. So,
Ladies and gentlemen, we have just heard the most powerful conversation. I hope you will join me in thanking the amazing Bill Bynum, the amazing Dane Spurill, and thank you, Hope Enterprise, for an amazing mobility forum this evening.
thank you, Lisa.
Thank you.